Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at Jonny Lipsham Studios. Welcome. It is June 14th. We're in the summertime already. That's just mental. It's crazy. And I still haven't gotten over it. But it is what it is. And so this year is going by way fast. Just so you know, folks, just as we were, I was showing no data. That's weird. Are we getting data out to the stream here? YouTube is saying that it's receiving no data. So I don't know what's going on here. That's weird. And now it says good connection. Okay. Sorry about that. YouTube just said no connection, no data for a second there. All right, so I think we're on. We're back, which is good. Anyway, just so you know, folks, we are thunderstorm warned again tonight, and actually, I can actually hear it rumbling about outside. So hopefully we'll get through. We did on Sunday. Sunday we had no trouble. And eventually we had, about 3 hours later, we had quite the spectacular thunderstorm. But we got through the show and it was fine. Our power did go off though, because I was on the after show on Sunday, and during that after show, the power just went completely off, and that was it. I was gone. But the power came on about an hour later, so it wasn't off for very long, fortunately. But yeah, so that's kind of the story today. So it's entirely possible that we might lose power, we might lose internet. So we're just going to try and get through as much as we can. So let's see, we don't have a whole lot of people here again. We've only got like 10 people here, which is a bit disappointing. But Billy Morgan was first in the door, and then followed by Rich Cresswell from Studio One Tuts is here. And we've got Keith from Radio Tuck Frumpet, and we've got Mike Johnson here, and Ronald Figura, and we've got Kevin's Guitar Stories, and we've got Kyle Drajusiak, and we've got Paul Morgan, and Don Oliver, and who else do we have? I think that's about it at the moment. But yeah, it's incredibly hot here. It's very humid as well. It's currently... outside it's about 15 degrees Celsius, but in here it's about 30 degrees. So it's like twice as hot in here as is out there. And I've got a fan just out of, you can kind of see it, that big black thing there. That is a fan. I've had that on running full tilt all day, and I've had the window open as well, and it is still incredibly hot. So I am wilting already, having turned the fan off just before we started the show. So tonight's show is all about, we're carrying on with melody writing and talking about that. And we're talking about counter melody and cool things like that. So the human brain is really, really clever. In fact, it's incredibly clever. Even, you know, those of us at the lower end of the IQ spectrum are still incredibly clever. Your brain is phenomenally clever. It is capable of receiving multiple streams of information at the same time and discerning them all and making sense of them all. So as such, it is not necessary for you to only write a single melody line. Now, most of you who are kind of the singer-songwriter category, maybe what you do is you have a vocal and acoustic guitar, and that's kind of the bulk of your songs. And that's fine. That's going to get you a good long way. But things like counter melody and obligatos and things like that are an incredibly handy little tool for adding some some ear candy, and also providing just something else for the listener's ear to latch onto, so that because the ear becomes fatigued quite quickly once it becomes familiar with certain sounds. You become very easily kind of passive instead of active in your listening. And so we don't want that to happen to our listener, because we want them to listen to the whole song all the way through from start to finish and be utterly captivated. So some of that is going to be really, really great lyrics and a good, strong main melody and a good arrangement. Those are the three main things that are going to keep a listener engaged. But you'll also find counter melody and secondary melodies and things like that are going to be very, very helpful for you. It's not uncommon to, if you're listening to instrumental music, for one instrument to have the melody and then another instrument to pick the melody up after a while. And there's a good reason for that. It's to reawaken the listener's ears. So composers all through music history have understood this concept, that you need to change up the sounds, the textures, the tones, the colors. So you don't have just like the brass section playing a melody the whole way through, all the time through the whole piece. You will counterbalance those with reed instruments like clarinets and saxophones, or you'll counter them with stringed instruments like violins and violas and cellos and things like that. That's why the orchestra has so many different sections to it. You'll have some playing the melody, you'll have another section or two that are playing the harmony, they're playing the chords, they're providing the harmonic backdrop to the piece, and then the other parts of the orchestra are providing different melodies to offset the main melody. The main melody is the most important thing. And so secondary melodies must never get in the way, but they can accompany the main melody, and they can decorate the main melody. So when we're talking about counter melodies, what are we talking about? Well, let's say you have a main melody that basically just lays out the chord tones. So let's say we've got, let's put this onto a piano sound. There we go. And let's say that's your main melody. And so that's what your vocalist is going to be singing. So you can decorate this. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can have another instrument play long tones, seeing as this is made up of short notes. So you can have another instrument playing this. So basically the other instrument, which is the counter melody instrument, is just basically going, playing long tones. And it's a much, much simpler part. Or you can have them playing maybe something slightly less simple. You could have them going. So that's kind of a little bit of an accompanying kind of concept that was developed in the early classical period. And it's called Alberti bass. And you'll hear this all over Mozart piano concertos. In the left hand, you'll hear, whilst the melody goes over the top. So that's more of an accompanying kind of role. So maybe if you've got like a flute or a clarinet playing the main melody, then maybe you've got this Alberti bass thing happening in a cello or a cello section. And then in the midst of that, you can have your, if that's going along at your counter melody can basically play quarter notes. Like that, whilst your main melody is going. So that's in essence one way in which you can do a counter melody. So a counter melody happens at the same time as a melody. It's not the same thing as call and response. Call and response is a great little tool because you can have a second instrument echo what your main melody sings. So if your main melody is going, everyone's going to get sick of this phrase. You could have a second instrument, basically as soon as this goes, you could have another instrument going. So you could have basically the counter melody there is doing the opposite. So when the melody is going down, the counter melody is doing the opposite. And you can expand the idea from there. So you can, stretch the melody out a little bit more and have it play a little bit higher up maybe. And then you can have a secondary melody that's going on underneath that. A good example in jazz music of this is there is a piece by Charlie Parker, and I'm just trying to remember the title of it right now. But it essentially has two completely different melodies that are played at the same time. One's played by the alto sax, the other one's played by the trumpet. And when you get to the end of the 16 bar A section, the two melodies meet and they play in two-part harmony together. They play the same rhythm in two-part harmony. But essentially they start like this, they go off into two completely different melodies, and then they come back. And they play the last two measures together. That's another way in which you can do a counter melody. So what is the difference between a counter melody and an obbligato? Well, a counter melody and an obbligato are actually sometimes very, very similar in what they can and cannot do. An obbligato is like a background melody. And that goes back to, the part at the beginning that I started with, where they are playing long tones. That's an obbligato. All right, so that would be a suitable obbligato. It's interesting, it's got some interest to it. It's not just spelling out the chord tones, it's got a little bit of interest to it, but it has a much slower rhythm, and it's not slower tempo, it's slower rhythm. So we're playing long notes in the obbligato, and we're playing much shorter notes in the main melody. And so those are different ways in which you can decorate up your melodies to make them sound much more interesting and much more engaging. As well as this, you can actually repeat a whole section of melody, but on a completely different instrument if you want as well. And the good thing about that is that's kind of like an echo kind of thing. You have a statement in one instrument, and then another instrument just basically takes over and maybe develops the ideas stated in the first melody on the first instrument. It basically takes those ideas and then elongates them, adds some extra notes and some extra flourishes to it, or it just restates it just on a different instrument. You can do that as well, and that's kind of a little arranging technique as much as it is counter melody. What about, Ronald Figueroa says, how about counter melodies with polytonality? Yeah, you can do that if you're into kind of that advanced kind of idea where there is no key center. Maybe you've got maybe you're working in two different keys at the same time, which would be called bitonality. Bitonality was a concept kind of developed at the very end of the Romantic period, as it turned into the 20th century. So by like maybe the early 1920s, beginning of the 1930s, maybe, bitonality was a thing. And certainly Holst's music, from the, kind of early 20th century, although still kind of post-romantic, has some of these 20th century ideas within it. Certainly Holst's music is replete with chromatic harmony, some of it very jazzy sounding actually, but he was also quite into exploring this idea of music in two keys at the same time. And you'll hear this in the Planet Suite, like for example in Neptune, which is the final piece of the whole suite. It's the 9th planet, and that particular movement of the suite, basically it doesn't move a whole lot. It definitely has thematic ideas, but melody's not the main thing with Neptune. It's textures and tone colors and kaleidoscopic shifting chords that makes that work interesting, and different textures. For example, harps, multiple harps, strings playing harmonics, bringing a choir towards the end of the piece, a wordless choir that had not been heard at all throughout the rest of the work, which is very, very clever. But there is lots of bitonality in there. There are sections of the piece which is in one key and another key at the same time. And I think that's what Ronald is talking about here. He's talking about using multiple key signatures at the same time. And you can certainly do this, and you can certainly do this effectively. It just kind of depends upon how much dissonance your ears will allow, and the ears of your listener will allow, and the context of the music that you're writing will allow. So, that's another thing to consider if you're talking about polytonality. And certainly you can make counter melody in a different key to the key of the main melody. For example, you could have, if you wanted to, you could have the main melody stated in the key of G major, and then maybe a counter melody in the key of B major, upper major third. There will be some clash points, however, if you do that. Here's G major. There's B major. There's some common notes. Let's move the mic over a bit. There's some common notes, because the B is in common. The F sharp is in common because that's the leading tone in the key of G major. There's a clashing point right there, because you have the fifth of the G major chord, the D, and the major third of a B major chord. You've got that minor ninth kind of thing going on there. So you'd have to be careful to avoid that. Now, you can kind of get away with it by moving it away by an octave. And it's a little bit less painful. So it kind of depends upon how much dissonance you want. And some pieces of music, you can get away with a lot more dissonance than others, and how you use it. And actually the listener won't mind so much if there's good grounds for it and there's a context for it. If you just do it completely by surprise in the middle of a piece and you just go, then your listener's going to go, what the heck is that? They're not going to dig it. They're not going to understand it. But if you use it sparingly and subtly and resolve those tensions, you can make those tensions really, really work to your advantage. But yes, certainly you could go. And you could kind of suggest a detuned kind of echo effect by doing that. It could kind of work. It could kind of work. You could certainly make that work. All right, so Secret Squirrel is moving. He says the packing and moving continues. Congratulations. I hope the move is going well for you. Dave from Bob's New York is here as well, and Paul Morgan is here as well. Let's see, who else is here? Sean Aaron is here as well. I'm glad you're here, Sean. Welcome. Who else is here? And Juan Ignacio Weissman is here as well. I missed you. I'm sorry about that. I didn't see you come in. But you are here, which is cool. And Keith is saying, don't you be a Kenny G. Yes, I intend not to be. There you go. All right, so anybody got any questions on any of that I talked about there? About counter melody and that kind of stuff. If there's anything you don't understand, then certainly we can go over it again and I will try and clarify as we go. But I hope that those were helpful tips for you on how you can decorate your melodies and make them a bit more interesting. Yeah, there are many and plentiful ways in which you can do it. And this is not just talking about two melodies. So we're not just talking about main melody and counter melody. You can do this with several melodies at once. In fact, there's a whole music period that predominantly features this idea, and this idea is counterpoint. So it's kind of related. So what is counterpoint? Counterpoint is the idea of having multiple melodies going on at the same time. And you get a simple version of counterpoint would be a round. For example, getting a bunch of friends together and singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, but each of you starts at a different point in the song. So, one person starts and then let's say 10 seconds later, the next person starts at the start of the song. And then 10 seconds after that, the next person starts at the start of the song. So everybody's at different points along at the song, and it all fits because it's all based around the same scale. So everybody fits, and you will find that there are points where you've got some unintended harmony, where the different notes will produce unintended harmony, but it will work, and it will work pretty effectively. But the thing with a round is eventually the person who started first will finish first, and then the person who started last will finish last. So a round is very simple counterpoint. But there are other forms of counterpoint where you have multiple melodies that will carry on throughout the work. A very complex version of counterpoint is fugue. Fugue was a particular composing style developed during the Baroque era, and probably the most famous exponent of the fugue was Johann Sebastian Bach, who, when equal temperament had kind of arrived and was something to be celebrated, that this was finally agreed on, this whole idea of 12 major keys and 12 minor keys, everything made beautiful sense. So to celebrate this tonal system coming into being, he wrote 48 preludes and fugues, one in every major key, one in every minor key. And so there was a prelude and a fugue in every major and minor key. So, that's how he came up with that. But the prelude basically states out some of the ideas that are going to be used later on in the fugue. And then you get to the start of the fugue. The first thing the fugue does is states the melody, the thematic ideas very clearly. And having stated it, the next part comes in. And the whole idea of a fugue is you start with voice one, and gradually different voices pick up this melody. So if you've got a 4-part fugue, then voice 1 starts. Then voice 2 starts with that theme. Then voice 3 comes in with that theme, and then voice 4 comes in with that theme later. So if you would go soprano, alto, tenor, bass, that's kind of how it would work. And so the bass part would take up this theme next, and then it would cascade backwards. So you go bass, tenor, alto, soprano. And then so when the thematic material runs out, so, you know, each voice has stated the thematic material, the thematic ideas, then they get what is called a free part, which means they will keep going. They don't stop. Well, rarely they stop. And what they will do is they will be providing harmony for the other parts until they're finished, and then they start restating the theme again. And then you get to a nice big conclusion. And that's kind of a little bit of how fugue works. Roger Beck asks a question, at what point in the production process do you decorate the melody? You can do that at any point. You can start with working out your decorations, your counterpoint, or your secondary melodies, or your obligatos. You can do all of that in the composing phase. I would suggest that the first thing you do is work out your main melody and the chord changes. Get those bare bones ideas down and locked and loaded and settled on. Then once you've got that, get those recorded into Studio One. Get your chords recorded, even if it's just a scratch piano track or a scratch guitar track, and then your melody is just you humming it. That's fine. Get those into Studio One, and then you can start adding some counterpoint, or you can add a counter melody, or you can add an obligato. You can do all of that fun stuff. Once you've got your main melody decided how it's going to go. So in terms of, pop songwriting, then, things like a counter melody or an obligato would not maybe make an appearance until the second verse, traditionally. Although traditions are there to be kind of dispensed with if you feel like it. But certainly the first verse of your song should be about the explicit statement of the melody and the lyrics. So make the arrangement quite simple, quite spare. So you've got the chords, you've got the music bed, you've got, keyboards, bass, drums, or guitars, bass, drums, whatever it is for your rhythm section, and your vocal melody, and nothing else for your first verse. And then get to your chorus. Make your chorus a little bit bigger than that. And the cool thing is, in your chorus, you can have some additional melody, a counter melody, an answering phrase to your main melody. And you can have that with, I don't know, a violin, or a flute, or a trumpet, or a saxophone, or a horn section, depending upon the style of music that you are working in. So when the melody, when the vocal kind of stops singing at the end of a phrase, you can fill out that phrase with something played by one of these other instruments. And you can either take an idea from the vocal melody and flip it, turn it upside down, and use that as a little fill phrase for your horn section or your other obligato instrument, whatever that's going to be. And that's how you provide a little bit of interest for your first chorus. Second verse, you can again keep the main melody up front, but then introduce something that will provide another color, another instrument. Maybe add another rhythm guitar. So now your rhythm guitars are a little bit wider, not necessarily full stereo, but certainly a little bit wider. Maybe your first verse is quite mono, second verse a little bit wider, so you've got an extra guitar in there. But then this is where you could start introducing another instrument that will play some long notes maybe, or will provide a simple little filler in between phrases. And then your chorus, big. Second chorus, big, full, big, wide stereo image, full instrumentation, full orchestration is in place at this point. And then, whatever you go into next, whether do you go into a bridge, do you go into a guitar solo, or do you, and then you finish off with an even bigger chorus that maybe has the guitar soloist continuing to solo over the chorus. You can certainly do that, and how do you stop that getting in the way of the main melody? That's where automation and other mixing techniques will come into play. So yeah, you can certainly do that at any point in your production process. But certainly I would say melodies, counter melodies, all of these ideas are compositional ideas. So they should be worked out in the composing and arranging phase. But, certainly document those ideas into Studio One so you're getting the bare bones of the structure fleshed out into a Studio One song. Good question, Roger. Peter Brooks says simplified. Yes, I am making it simplified. I'm taking, complex things and making them simple. But Fugue is very, very complex. You can go and you can do a university, undergraduate degree in Fugue if you want to. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. Let's see. Keith says some modern techno builder type songs are almost fugues of the modern day. In some respects, yes. In some respects, no. Because there is not so much in the way of counterpoint. There's not really much counterpoint going on in techno. There's lots of different things popping up here and there, but there's not the continuous layering of multiple layers of continuous melody, which is what fugue is. Ronald says RTFM, repeat the fugue melody. Yes, that's very good. I like that. Secret Squirrel says, how might you approach complementing / accompanying a supporting vocalist, perhaps with a secondary or counter melody in a song with a vocal duo without drowning the lead melody? Now, if you've got a vocal duo, so you've got two singers, have a listen to some really, really good duets. Island in the Stream is one that springs to mind. That's actually quite a good duet. I don't personally like the song, but it's well crafted, it's well written, it's got all the key ingredients. Sometimes the melody is sung by both vocalists in harmony. In the case of Island in the Stream, it's in thirds. So, with the female above the male. Now, the interesting thing there is that sometimes the male is actually the lead and the female is the harmony, and sometimes it's the other way around. So sometimes the melody is the lower part and the harmony is the upper part, and sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the melody is on top with the harmony underneath. Most people, when they think about harmonizing, they think the melody needs to be on top with the harmony parts underneath. You can certainly approach it that way, but it's not the only way you can do it. You can have the melody in a lower voice or a lower instrument with harmony on top. It's perfectly legitimate. And then the way you deal with making sure that the upper voice does not overwhelm the lower voice, again, that's mixing, balancing, maybe a little bit of automation, maybe a little bit of side chaining to kind of get them so that it's clear which one is the melody and which one's the harmony. And the brain is very, very clever again, because the brain can discern which is which as well. So things like automation and those kind of things are just there to help the listener, to assist the listener getting which is which. Mostly people understand, they don't have a problem, and so your automation is actually just helping them grasp that easier. They're not having to work hard to figure it out. But also you can have two vocalists singing different melodies at the same time as well. Some great examples of that come from the musical Chess, where there are songs where you have two lead vocals and they're almost sparring off one another. one is making one statement, immediately the other vocalist is continuing that idea or contradicting that idea. And it's like a conversation. You can absolutely do that in your songs. It's a little bit more complicated to do. It's a much more complex technique for composing and for writing, to write for two vocals like that, where it's conversational. But yes, you get that a lot in musicals. You get that in opera a lot. I mean, that's kind of where it comes from. And in fact, a lot of techniques that you see in modern musicals have been borrowed from opera. Which is kind of like, musicals are essentially based upon the foundation of opera. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question. Peter Brooks says he likes it on top. No comment. Examples of vocal chess. No, I'm not talking about vocal chess. I'm talking about the musical chess. There is a musical called Chess. And so that's what I'm referring to. So that's the example that I was referring to. Yeah, it's not musical. It's not musical chess. It's the musical called Chess. Not sure that you can actually do musical chess. Though you might, certainly with surround mixing, maybe you could, because maybe you could mimic the movement of the bishop using surround mixing, and you just pick an instrument that represents the bishop, and you could probably do that. But that's not kind of what I mean. Just Bob says, then there is the Everly Brothers. They both sing harmonies within the melodies. It makes hard to sing harmony. Yeah, and also the Righteous Brothers, the Beach Boys. Beach Boys are very fine examples of melody and counter melody going on at the same time. In a lot of their songs, you'll have that. Like Good Vibrations, for example. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of harmony going on, and actually some complex, quite dense vocal harmonies going on. But sometimes you've got, the upper part singing one melody and then a lower part singing a complementary melody underneath it. That's counter melody. That's what I'm talking about. So in the chorus of Good Vibrations, I'm not going to sing it for copyright reasons. I will get a strike if I do so, but go look that up on YouTube and listen to the chorus. Listen to how the upper vocal parts state the chorus melody, and then the lower parts have their own little counter melody underneath it. That is a really fine example of counter melody that I'm talking about. And I'm just watching myself gesticulating like this. It's bizarre. I really should stop doing such things. But those are great questions. We got 20 minutes left, folks. And I'm just looking back at some of the humor before we started the show. You guys are funny. And there is a little bit of smut in the chat, I will say. And I will allow it this once. Because I'm in that kind of mood. It's fine. But Kyle is in very, very fine form. Wow. Ronald Figura is quoting Jackie Gleason. Good grief. Okay. Any other questions, folks? We've got about 15 minutes left. And I am absolutely cooking here. And somebody just pinged me. But I don't see it. Was it message request? Nope. I don't see that either, so I don't know what it was. Oh, I see what it was. It's cool. Any other questions, guys and gals? We don't have a lot of people here tonight. We've kind of peaked at like 19, which is like way lower than we normally would. Thank you, Keith. Yes, I'm very close to being on fire. I am absolutely dripping. It's so hot in here, and I'm sure my poor computer is going. I would if I was my computer. How you doing under there? Yeah, it's the fan is working. I can hear it. It's doing its thing. But hopefully it's not going to overheat. So I hope everybody has got some good examples there of counter melody, counterpoint, and some ideas that they can use for their songs going forward. We've been on for just about 42 minutes. Ronald. Yeah, that's funny, and I'm not going to do the actions for that chorus. Mike says he will launch a Zoom and share the link when you're done. Well, we are getting close to that, I think, because questions have certainly dried up, and I've kind of gone through most of my stuff. So we'll see if there's a couple more questions, but certainly, Mike, you can post your link anytime. Secret Squirrel says, how do you approach providing vocal parts to a song you are co-writing, as you are not a vocalist? No, I am a vocalist. I have been a singer and a songwriter for a very, very long time. Probably for around about 40 years, I would say. But yeah, and I do write with other people as well. I have a long-standing songwriting partnership with a guy that I have been working with for many years, over 30 years. And he and I write mostly for other people. So let me see. How do I approach providing vocal parts for a song that you are co-writing? But I also do write for other people as well. So I'll address this kind of as a solo songwriter, if you like. So if I'm working with an artist, like I was working with an artist called Samantha a few years ago, and she's a Christian artist, so I was working with her on some of her worship songs. And I was mostly there, to be honest, I was mostly there as an arranger rather than as a songwriter, because she already had the songs. She had the songs clearly worked out. For the most part, she had clear melody ideas, chord changes, and some good lyrics. I helped her improve the lyrics a wee bit. But I also helped to, there were points where I had to essentially rewrite parts of her melody, because she actually did what a lot of young songwriters do. She wrote the song actually too high for her to sing. It was in the right key, but it was not in the right range for her voice. Now we could have given the song off to somebody else to sing, but she didn't want to do that. She wanted to sing the song herself. So I agreed with her that what we would do is we would rewrite the song just a bit. So here's what we did. We kept the verse in G major, and the chorus we dropped down into the key of F major. And then at the end of the chorus, we do a little passing 2-5-1 back into G major. And the listener, basically, the way I worked the arrangement was the listener would be blissfully unaware that they are changing key for the chorus and then changing back again for the verse. But it actually really worked. Just taking the vocal melody down a step, and it's not a big change. I wasn't asking her to take it down by 2 whole steps, going down from G major to E flat major. We just went down a whole step, and it worked for her voice, and she got a much better performance because she wasn't straining in the chorus. We could have rewritten the melody of the chorus to make the tessitura of the melody to be a little bit lower, so the range of the melody to be a little bit narrower. We could have done that, but that really didn't work for her either. So we actually just changed the key, to be honest. But it really worked for her. It made a big difference to the performance that we ended up getting out of her for the song. And actually, when we actually went to record the vocal, and it was just done with a guide piano part that I put down. And she just sang along to the piano part. But she nailed the vocal. She absolutely nailed the vocal. And we realized when we listened to the playback in the control room, actually having the chorus in that different key really, really helped the lyrics. It was kind of unintended. We had really thought about the music more than the lyrics to try and get it to work for her so that she could sing it, because she insisted that she wanted to sing it. But it worked for her. And we got a really great performance, and we realized that it actually really worked for the lyrics as well. So then I went and fleshed out the rest of the arrangement with an orchestral arrangement. And it worked out really, really well. And I decorated her vocal melody with, I think in the second verse, I had an oboe and a clarinet playing either, kind of playing in harmonies at different points. Playing a counter melody in between vocal phrases in harmony, in thirds and things like that. And then I had an answering phrase from violins. And I had like an obligato, a slow moving counter melody in cellos underneath that. And so that's how we multi-layered all the melodies together. And it really, really worked. And we ended up with a really great song at the end of it. That was years and years ago. But she really, really liked the arrangement that I did for her at the end of the day. Because she had never thought about, hey, let's do this with an orchestra. But that's what we did. We had orchestra, we had piano, we had acoustic guitar, and upright bass. And that was it. There was no drums. There was no other rhythm section parts. And it worked beautifully. But there we go. That's a good question. Let's see. Rich asks, what are your thoughts on listening to your music on playback and writing down ideas? Yeah, I do that. And yes, I said do. I do that. When I'm working on a song, and I have ideas clearly worked out in my head, I start recording them into Studio One. And once I've spent a night working on it, it may not be finished, but once I've spent like a whole night working on it, I save it. I do an export mix down to MP3, and I send that to myself, and I listen to it. I go to bed, and I put it on my phone. I put my earbuds in, and I close my eyes, and I listen to it on loop play all night. So I will only have that one song on looping constantly all night in my ears. And then when I next do a session with that song, because I've had that song playing around in my head all night, I've got the next set of ideas. And then I carry on. I do the next part of the song, and so on and so forth. But yes, listening to your own playbacks, even if the song's not finished, can inspire other key things that might work in the song, that might go into the song. So always listen back to the ideas that you've got at the end of a session. Don't just kind of shut down the computer and walk away. Some people do that and that works for them, but for the most part, I don't advise it. For the most part, I say, listen to it. Listen to it for a week and see if you have new ideas that come in that either supplant ideas that you had in the original session or will complement the ideas that you had in that session. It's a good question. Just Bob has got to run. He says he promised his beautiful wife dinner. You better go and make that dinner. You don't want that beautiful wife to be upset now. Chico Squirrel says, any chance that you may use more of your vocals during your streams? It could aid use to conceive greater ranges of questions due to hearing different contexts. Unfortunately, when I'm doing this show, it is midnight. And my wife is asleep just the other side of that door. And just down the corridor, my kids are asleep as well. So it's not really something I can do on these shows, unfortunately, which is why I've never done that on these shows. And I've been doing these shows for a very long time. Yes, you are correct. Keith. The world has probably been undone by doo-doo, as well as poo-poo, I would suggest. Because I'm sure that a lot of people have poo-pooed their poo-poos, and then their poo-poos have poo-pooed their poo-poos. It's a Blackadder thing. Some people will get that. Some people won't. All right, we have reached the end of the show. Mike, you may post your link. And if you would like to come join us after show and chill and chat and get to know people here and talk more about songwriting, then definitely we can go do that. So Mike, please do get your link into the chat. I am literally melting away here and would quite like to turn my lights off before I roast. So we will end the show there, and I will see you all on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. So that will be Sunday the 18th. Gosh, we're rattling through June already, aren't we? So yes, that'll be Sunday 18th for Sunday Night Live, and I'll see you then. Have a great rest of your week. Good night, everybody.